Only hours ago, Princess Catherine was overcome with emotion as she revealed a heartbreaking reality about her youngest child, Prince Louis. Once the liveliest presence in the royal household, Louis had become quiet, distant, and fragile, his joyful smile disappearing without explanation. What devastated Catherine most was the hushed admission he finally shared after days of silence. In just one sentence, he revealed months of unspoken pain. What had unfolded behind palace doors left even Prince William stunned. Something had changed, suddenly and profoundly. At just 6 years old, Prince Louis had long been the light of Adelaide Cottage. His mornings were filled with laughter, his days driven by boundless curiosity, especially when it came to insects roaming the palace gardens. As the youngest child of Princess Catherine and Prince William, he was known for chasing ducks across the grounds, climbing into Catherine's lap during briefings, and once announcing over a Tuesday breakfast that he planned to become a dinosaur expert. But by late January 2024, that light began to fade. The joy dulled. The laughter disappeared, replaced by an unsettling quiet. Initially, the changes seemed small and easy to brush aside. A skipped meal here. A forgotten game there. But then Prince George, 10 years old, noticed Louis no longer joined him outside. Princess Charlotte, 8, pleaded with Louis to play the dragon in their favorite game, only to watch him turn away and gaze silently out the window. Plates of food went untouched. His once famous curiosity vanished. He stopped asking about flowers and abandoned his elaborate meetings with stuffed animals. By mid-February, denial was no longer possible. William believed the shift stemmed from Catherine's recent battle with cancer. "He's just worried about Mommy," he told staff. Catherine, however, sensed something deeper. Even after her recovery in March 2024, Louis continued to withdraw, drifting further from joy. Teachers at Lamrook School discreetly raised concerns. Louis spoke less, participated less. Staff recalled finding him alone, murmuring to himself or staring ahead, as if burdened by thoughts far beyond his years. The warmth that once filled their home had vanished. The emotional atmosphere grew heavy and cold. Catherine watched as the boy who once burst into her office unannounced now lingered behind doorways. The child who used to race William through the halls now barely walked beside him. Light had been replaced by shadow. Though the family tried to talk openly, the cause of Louis' silence remained unknown. An unspoken dread settled over royal life, as though everyone sensed something terrible was approaching, even if no one could yet name it. Then, without warning, sadness turned to terror. What began as emotional distance escalated overnight into a medical crisis. On a bitter Tuesday morning in April, their fears became reality, the day everything collapsed. Just after 7 a.m., Princess Catherine entered her youngest son's bedroom. Soft morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Adelaide Cottage, but the scene before her was alarming. Louis lay tightly curled beneath the covers, shaking uncontrollably despite the warmth. His skin burned with fever, his eyes half open and unfocused. Catherine called for William, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. William arrived within seconds. The color drained from his face as he felt his son's scorching forehead. Louis didn't respond. The 6-year-old who once splashed in puddles and ran barefoot across the grass was now struggling to breathe. Catherine wrapped him in a blanket while William carried him downstairs, issuing calm but urgent instructions to security. Emergency procedures were immediately set in motion. At 7:14 a.m., palace officers cleared the roads. Escorted by flashing lights, the family sped through Windsor toward Frimley Park Hospital, where medical teams stood ready. Catherine spoke softly to Louis throughout the journey. "Stay with me, darling. Please stay with me." Doctors rushed to stabilize him. Machines surrounded his small body as his heart rate surged and his temperature climbed past 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. William and Catherine stood outside the trauma unit, overwhelmed by questions they couldn't answer. How long had he been sick? Any recent infections? Warning signs? They had none. Catherine gripped William's hand, her fingers ice-cold, as nurses hurried past. "We're doing everything possible," the lead doctor said, but his expression betrayed uncertainty. Time dragged on in agonizing silence. No diagnosis. No improvement. No answers. Catherine's body shook under the weight of the unknown. Her thoughts replayed every quiet moment from the past weeks, now glowing with alarm. The untouched pancakes. The empty stare. The night she found him crying alone. Now her worst fear was unfolding before her eyes. The laughter that once echoed through their home felt like it belonged to another lifetime entirely. Even Catherine's strength had limits. After nearly 12 hours with no answers, a brief update from a nurse, "We still don't know yet," became the moment she finally broke. The hallway outside the pediatric ICU felt colder than any royal chamber she had ever known. At 7:45 p.m., after nearly 12 hours without a diagnosis, a young nurse emerged and gently shook her head. No news. Catherine's legs gave way. She collapsed onto the floor, shaking, her sobs echoing through the sterile corridor. "I can't do this again," she cried. "I can't lose another one." William knelt beside her, holding her tightly. "You're not alone," he whispered. "We're still fighting." This was a side of royalty the public never sees, not ceremony or splendor, but a mother in pieces. Her tears soaked William's shirt as security officers quietly formed a protective circle. They turned away out of respect, though anguish was written on their faces. They were trained for danger, but not for this. At 8:10 p.m., King Charles arrived and found them on the floor. Without hesitation, he knelt down, grimacing softly as his body strained. He rested a hand on Catherine's shoulder and whispered, "You are not alone." His voice faltered. Having buried Princess Diana nearly 26 years earlier in 1997, the possibility of losing his grandson reopened long-healed wounds. He spoke not as a monarch, but as a father who had once lost everything. Catherine wiped her tears and looked up. "I need to see him," she whispered. "I need to hold him." Slowly, she stood, leaning on William for strength. "Let's go," he said gently. Together, the three of them returned to Louise's room. Inside, Louis lay motionless. Machines beeped steadily. 4 lines traced his small arm. His breathing was weak but steady. Catherine took his hand and kissed his fever-warm knuckles. "I'm here, my love," she whispered. "You're not going anywhere." In that moment, the fight became deeply, painfully personal. What had once seemed like a simple fever or an unexplained illness became something far more devastating. It was the story of a family standing on the brink, desperately trying to pull their young son back from an emotional darkness that threatened to consume him. On the third day, everything changed. Louis finally opened his eyes, focused on his parents, and spoke words that shattered what little peace they had left. At approximately 11:32 a.m. on the third day, 6-year-old Prince Louis slowly regained consciousness. His fever had broken during the night, and the machine surrounding his bed reflected steady improvement, his heart rate calming, his oxygen levels stabilizing. Catherine sat close beside him, her hands shaking as she gently brushed his hair away from his forehead. William pulled his chair nearer, barely daring to blink, terrified he might miss his son's first words. When Louis finally whispered, "Papa, I'm sorry," the air in the room seemed to stop. 2 minutes later, at 11:34 a.m., those simple words opened a door to a truth none of them were prepared for. Catherine held his hand softly and reassured him, telling him he had done nothing wrong. But Louis couldn't meet her eyes. His voice cracked as he revealed the secret he had been carrying alone for months. He believed they were going to replace him. The words struck with physical force. William struggled to breathe. Catherine felt the ground beneath her shift. In broken sentences, Louis explained what had led him there, adult conversations he overheard during Catherine's treatment, whispers from staff, and cruel rumors filtering in from outside voices. In his young mind, Catherine's illness meant she had less time for him. Talk of a new baby convinced him that he would soon be unwanted. He described nights spent crying silently so no one would notice him. He admitted pretending he wasn't hungry so food wouldn't be wasted on him. He spoke about hiding behind doors, listening for footsteps, terrified that Catherine would stop coming into his room altogether. Every word he used, new baby, replace, forgotten, cut deeper than any diagnosis ever could. This wasn't an illness that had consumed him. It was fear. A fear he had carried alone since January 2024. Through Catherine's 8-week treatment, through recovery, through school days when he couldn't concentrate because he believed he was slowly disappearing. William abruptly stood and turned toward the window, tears burning his eyes as guilt weighed heavily on him. Catherine leaned closer to her son and whispered the truth. There was no baby coming. He was not replaceable. He was their Louis, and nothing, now, in 10 years, or ever, would change that. Louis's face collapsed as he whispered a single word, promise. William rushed back to the bed and carefully gathered his son into his arms, mindful of the wires and machines. Holding him tightly, he swore with every part of himself that Louis would always belong with them. Louis's confession didn't simply break their hearts, it transformed them. The guilt that crashed over Catherine and William in that hospital room forced them to confront painful truths about their parenting. But heartbreak was only the first step. What followed was reflection, and with it, the devastating realization of how many warning signs they had missed. Later that night, at 9:56 p.m., long after Louis had fallen asleep, Catherine and William sat together in the small family lounge near the ICU. Exhaustion etched deep shadows beneath their eyes as they finally spoke openly about everything they had overlooked. Catherine replayed the moments that now haunted her, Louis refusing breakfast in February, his tears in the library, the nights he woke screaming. She admitted she thought her illness was the cause, never realizing he believed she was leaving him forever. The guilt clung to her relentlessly. William acknowledged his own failures. He had brushed off Louis's withdrawal, assuming it was temporary sadness tied to the family's emotional recovery. But Louis had been crying out in every way he knew how. One by one, William listed the missed signs, the untouched meals on March 2nd, staff reports of Louis sitting motionless for 20 minutes, his refusal to play football on March 18th. Each memory landed like a blow. Covering his face, William whispered that he had failed his son. By 10:40 p.m., they made life-altering decisions. Catherine instructed her team to clear her calendar for the next 3 months, cancelling all public appearances scheduled between May and July 2024. She declared that her children came first. William followed, restructuring his commitments and building space around every obligation. They contacted 2 child psychologists and scheduled appointments within 48 hours of Louis's discharge. The specialists explained that children often interpret adult conversations in catastrophic ways. Louis had believed a new baby meant losing his place in the family. He wasn't acting out, he was mourning a family he thought was slipping away. Though painful, their guilt became a catalyst for change. They introduced nightly check-in circles, giving each child space to share their thoughts and feelings. Catherine adjusted mornings so she could personally wake each child. William committed to individual outings with each child every week, ensuring none of them ever felt invisible again. The promise they made was silent but unwavering. Never again would fear go unnoticed. Never again would silence be ignored. Yet the emotional damage reached further than they initially realized. Louis wasn't the only one hurting. Within the rooms and corridors of Adelaide Cottage, 2 other young hearts were quietly breaking, confused and desperate for reassurance. Princess Charlotte, 8 years old, felt the shift first in early March 2024. One afternoon, she prepared an elaborate tea party, tiny cups, stuffed animals, and a carefully selected outfit for Louis's teddy bear. At 4:12 p.m., she knocked on his door, hopeful. But Louis never came. He didn't even respond. Charlotte sat on the carpet for 17 minutes, waiting. When she finally left, she carried his untouched teacup with her, tears silently falling. 10-year-old Prince George tried a different tactic. On March 25th, he challenged Louis to a football match, even offering to let him score 3 goals. Louis declined. George then built an enormous fort in the playroom using blankets, chairs, cushions, and fairy lights pulled from the Christmas box. Proudly, he told Louis it reached the ceiling. Still, Louis only whispered that he didn't feel like it. For a big brother accustomed to Louis's endless energy, the rejection felt like losing a teammate, a best friend, a constant presence that had always followed him. By late March, both siblings were visibly distressed. Charlotte asked a nanny if Louis no longer loved her. George tried to reassure her, though his own uncertainty was clear. Palace staff later recorded a moment on April 2 when the two siblings hugged in the hallway, Charlotte crying openly, George wiping his eyes quickly, trying to stay strong. They missed the brother who roared like a dinosaur at breakfast, chased them through the garden, and laughed so loudly the sound echoed through the house. Once William and Catherine fully understood the depth of their children's pain, they acted without delay. They gently explained that Louis wasn't ignoring them, he was hurting in ways he didn't yet know how to express. And as Louis began to recover, they made space for healing, arranging dedicated sibling-only playtime to help mend what fear had quietly broken. On Louis' second day of recovery, Charlotte sat beside his hospital bed, reading him her favorite story. By the third day, George had brought a small football, rolling it gently toward Louis. He didn't kick it hard, just a soft tap, but to George, it felt like a miracle. Slowly, the three children began to rebuild the bond that had once seemed broken. Yet, healing was not only taking place among the children. Outside Louis' hospital room, a steady presence appeared each day, someone carrying decades of royal experience, deep paternal regret, and a grandfather's fierce devotion. Quietly, his role became the anchor the family so desperately needed. King Charles had stepped in. On the fifth day of Louis' hospitalization, King Charles III arrived at St. Mary's Hospital just after 8 a.m., accompanied by minimal security. He requested no special reception, just a chair near his grandson's room and a quiet moment with his family. Emotionally drained, William and Catherine embraced him without a word. The king's presence was far more than ceremonial, it was profoundly human. For Charles, who had missed so many moments with William and Harry in their early years, this was a rare chance to step in, not as monarch, but as grandfather. From April 3 to April 10, he visited daily, each time bringing something personal, a worn Beatrix Potter book William had loved, a polished river stone from Burke Hall engraved with Louis' initials, and on April 7, a handwritten note, Louis, you are never replaceable. You are a king in our eyes, always. These small gestures wove new threads of belonging into Louis' heart. Catherine later said it was Charles's quiet presence that softened the edges of their pain. In private conversations with Louis, Charles shared stories from his own childhood, the loneliness at Gordonstown, the weight of expectations, and the fear that his parents were too busy to notice him. Louis listened intently, seeing a side of Charles rarely revealed to the public. I wasn't always brave, Charles confessed. But I always mattered, and so do you. One staff member described this conversation as a turning point. From that day on, Louis asked to see his grandfather every morning. Charles also supported William and Catherine practically. He cleared their duties for 2 weeks, offered to personally cover an April 15 royal engagement, and coordinated with royal advisors to ensure no media intrusion reached the hospital. Behind palace walls, he reminded his senior aides, this is not a protocol issue. This is family. With Charles's steady guidance, the family began to find space to heal. As Louis regained physical strength, his emotional recovery slowly followed. The boy who had once withdrawn into silence began to reach out again with cautious hope and shy smiles. Healing progressed in small, meaningful steps. By April 11, 2024, the ward nurse noted that Louis had eaten his first full breakfast, 2 toast triangles, 3 strawberries, and a single cookie. It was a small victory, but to William and Catherine, it meant everything. That afternoon, Charlotte visited again, and Louis accepted her invitation to a tea party, this time in his hospital room. They sipped pretend tea from real mugs, laughing at her dramatic voices for the stuffed animals. George soon joined, and the 3 siblings played cards for 26 minutes straight, the longest Louis had stayed engaged since falling ill. Routine became the foundation of recovery. Catherine established a morning ritual, reading aloud from a favorite book at 9 a.m. William continued nightly animal story chats, inventing tales of jungle elephants and castle foxes. By April 14, Louis smiled freely again. When asked what he wanted to do once home, he replied, I want to go to the garden and find clouds with George. Physical therapy was introduced gently. Louis began short walks down the corridor, flanked by his siblings, while nurses cheered from behind the station. On April 17, he threw his first light football pass in the hospital courtyard, with George proudly calling it the comeback kick. Charlotte brought a journal to document every new moment, earning the staff's nickname as the Little Royal Reporter. Even in recovery, the siblings found ways to support and heal one another. Psychological support remained central. Weekly sessions with a child psychologist in Oxford helped Louis express lingering fears through drawings and play. The therapist praised the family's openness, telling them, "You're building resilience through presence." William and Catherine committed to continuing therapy after discharge, determined to protect the emotional progress they had made. As discharge neared, a profound shift occurred, not just in Louis, but in Catherine. She had seen her son disappear into shadows once and vowed never to let it happen again. What began as maternal grief transformed into a vow forged in heartbreak and bound by love. Never again would her son feel forgotten. On April 22, as Louis prepared to leave the hospital, Catherine released a statement through Kensington Palace, cancelling all official engagements until August 1, 2024. "My child comes first now," she wrote. The words were simple, but behind them stood a mother remade by pain, who had learned that royal duty, however noble, could never eclipse motherhood. Within 3 days, the family restructured life at home. Morning rituals became non-negotiable, bedtime excluded nannies or aides, and Saturdays became child choice days. George chose football, Charlotte chose baking, and Louis wanted to explore garden bugs. Catherine enrolled in a 6-week online program on child grief and fear processing, filling her notebooks with notes on emotional literacy and trauma in young children. She introduced new habits, emotion cards, weekly check-in dinners to voice feelings without judgment, and a family board listing 3 daily joys. Louis's first entry read, "Mommy kissed my head 3 times today." Catherine also made her position clear in palace meetings: no engagement would be accepted without cross-referencing family availability. She began informal discussions with other royal mothers, opening the door to mental health support for royal children. Privately, Charles praised her, "You've modernized motherhood in this monarchy." Publicly, she remained silent, her actions spoke for themselves. Then, in a single ordinary moment, the family rediscovered joy. On April 24, around 5:45 p.m., the family gathered in the sunroom of Adelaide Cottage. The windows were open to the cool spring breeze. Catherine sorted papers on the couch while William played quietly with Charlotte and George nearby. Louis wandered in with a book tucked under his arm. "Can we read the elephant book Grandpa gave me?" he asked, eyes bright. Catherine looked up, stunned. William froze, then smiled. "Of course," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Pulling Louis onto his lap, he opened a worn book, King Charles's gift from Burke Hall. As William read, Louis giggled at the silly voices, laughing so hard by the 3rd page that he nearly rolled off the sofa. Charlotte snuggled next to them, George leaned on William's shoulder, and Catherine reached over to take Louis's hand. "You are everything, my darling," she whispered. William kissed the top of his son's head, tears escaping silently. No cameras captured the moment. No reporters chronicled it. But for this family, it was a royal milestone no coronation could rival. That night, Adelaide Cottage echoed with laughter, not just Louis's, but all of theirs. Laughter born from survival, stitched together by forgiveness, and held strong by love. The crisis had not vanished, but they had faced it, named it, and conquered its darkest threat, silence. Louis had been lost, but now he was home. From whispered fears to healing embraces, Prince Louis's journey had shaken the royal family to its core. Through it all, Catherine's vow remained unshaken: never again would her son feel forgotten. His laughter returned, his spirit rose, and love, not duty, now led this family. In the end, it wasn't a royal title, but a mother's tearful promise that began to mend a heart no one realized was breaking.